Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LPL week number 2 overview and analysis video here in the summer split. We are back from the Esports World Cup. We have our winner, we have our performances. Obviously, I didn't cover it on this channel. It's a best of 3 tournament. Didn't really excite me all that much. Really wasn't all that interested in watching it, but I'm sure the results were interesting. You know, top esports making the final is definitely interesting here for LPL fans, but generally, I don't think there's a ton to take away from that tournament just because best of 3s are so volatile in and of itself. But we're getting back into the LPL action here as we get back to domestic play in basically all of the regions. And for the LPL, we are really kickstarting and jumping into a lot of games, and so I don't want this intro to be long. If you guys want to know my thoughts on everything that's happened in the LPL, check out the playlist up in the iCard. That's more important in this video than it will be basically at any other point, because honestly, with as many best of 3s as there are in the LPL each week now, I'm not going to spend as much time recapping and going over the things that I've said in previous weeks. I'm going to assume that a lot of people who are watching this know my thoughts and opinions on a lot of these players, and I'm just basically strictly going to be talking about how these games change those opinions. I know that that's not exactly the best thing to do here on YouTube in case someone's tuning into this series for the first time. I try to make sure that people are caught up to speed, but there's just too much to get through, and so I am going to be a bit quicker. Maybe not entirely quick. This video is still likely going to be 2+ hours, but there are a lot of games to cover, and so I want to try and shorten it as much as possible. So check out that playlist if you are interested. But today, we are going to be going series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the video, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will, of course, also be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 17, talking about where I think these teams land after 2 weeks of action in the official summer split. But, you know, we're getting closer and closer to figuring out where these teams are going to land. It's not make or break to win this week just yet, but you don't have infinite time to figure things out. It's really going to be imperative to figure out where you want to be as quickly as possible. So an important week 2, but with all of that out of the way, let's jump into the analysis. And that means starting off with day number 1. And in fact, this is actually one of the more interesting matchups of the week for me. We start in Group Nirvana. That's the lower group. Group Ascend is, of course, the upper group in case you forgot. Very weird names, but it's always important to remind people. We start in Group Nirvana with a matchup between Team WE and LGD Gaming. And WE is going to pick up the 2-0 win. This is a super important win for them. They actually did make a change in their lineup. Hang is out. Yang Xiang, I believe is how you say it. Yang Xiang. You could let me know if I'm right or wrong on that. If it's Yan Xiang, just let me know down in the comments section below. He is subbing in here into the jungle position, clearly from a playstyle perspective. And I think that this is a fine move. We'll talk about why I actually think this is okay for WE moving forward. I am a lot lower on Hang, as anybody who's followed the channel will know, but it certainly was a good move in this context because Yang Xiang is clearly better at playing AP junglers. Like, it was not even remotely comparable to Hang, who is really just a tank player. Now, I like Hang. I think in the right circumstances, he can be an interesting jungler like he was last year in terms of his ability to get early leads. But in a meta where it's all about team fighting and generating resources for the late game, he's just not built for that. That's not the kind of player that is going to succeed in a meta like this. So moving into someone like, Yang Xiang could be the right thing to do. There were a lot of whispers and rumors about Wei coming in here to start in the jungle. We'll talk later on about how that is not happening, about how he's going somewhere else, but this is fine. I know people aren't super excited about him as a player, just in general, because he's been stuck in the LDL system for WE for forever. It feels like he's just kind of been, one of those guys who's only good enough for the LDL, but he looked pretty good here in his debut against Jeje, so pretty encouraging. But player of the series for me is going to go to Abel in the bot lane. Really excited to be able to say that because it was a little bit shaky in their first week. The end of that qualification series just wasn't great with Abel subbing in, but, we expected this to take some time. Abel and Mark are a very aggressive bot lane, at least on paper. Both of them are very aggressive players, and so to see one of them struggle a bit out of the gate, especially when he's maybe not as comfortable with the rest of his teammates, that was to be anticipated, but he was the best player in this series by a large margin. He was awesome, and again, if he's just going to be good, LP was a disaster for this team. He truly was one of the worst AD carries in the league, so Abel just needs to be fine. Wayward had a couple of really funny plays, even if his scoreline looks kind of bad. Fofo continues to be amazing and super consistent for this team, and Mark has honestly been good, I would say, for a majority of this split as well. He's just been saddled with LP down in the bot lane. So a nice win for WE, and a pretty bad loss for EDG. I continue to think that people keep overhyping this team. I see a lot of top 10 kind of love for EDG. I just don't see it. I don't see this team having that kind of upside. Their inconsistency is just too real. And at this point, I'm kind of starting to sell my leave stock. He's going to get done of the series here for me. He makes like 1 or 2 plays every game where it's like, what are you doing? He honestly reminds me of Bo a little bit, and that's a very weird comparison. You know, different roles, very different styles, but it's that Lee will play really well, and mechanically speaking, he's in good positions for a majority of the game, and then there's just one play in the back half of the game where it's like, what are you doing? Like, why are you there? And it loses his team games, like, really consistently. So I'm pretty out on Leave. I think if he doesn't solve that problem, if he doesn't find a way to just not throw away good advantages in the middle of the game, he's never really going to be that elite AD carry that he has the talent to be. Wink can't save him in those circumstances. Cryan continues to be fine. Honestly, he's really not been all that good for EDG. He's certainly been worse than he was for IG earlier on in the year. I really like Solo Kill on the top side, but he couldn't do anything in this series. Jeje was whatever, got out jungled by a rookie that's been lamenting down in the LDL, and so it's not a great sign for EDG. I continue to think that this team is overhyped and overrated, and I think this result was kind of an example of that, and WE is very underrated. This team was supposed to get out of their group, and the fact that they didn't is obviously disappointing for them, but I think it gives them a good opportunity to kind of run Group Nirvana, and honestly, this is a really good start to that. And then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and we're moving into Group Ascend for LGD Gaming taking on Anyone's Legend. And AL is going to pick up the 2-0 series win here. LGD probably not going to do super well here in Group Ascend. You know, we talked about how great it was that they finished top 2 in their group over WE, how big of an accomplishment that is. This is just out of their wheelhouse. They are not good enough to be able to compete with the best teams in the LPL regularly, and I think that's going to get exposed over the course of the next few weeks, but it's good that they made it here for AL. This is one of the best teams in the LPL. They continue to kind of prove that they are more consistent than maybe we were giving them credit for. This team is now 2-0. They are 4-0 to start this stage, and who's to say that this can't be a team that ends up competing for top 2 or top 3? I think that that is something that is possible for them. I'm still not going to go out on a limb and say that. I think top 3 feels like a pretty big gap to try and surmount right now if you're any team outside of that, but AL is, like I show in my power rankings, my favorite to make Worlds as that number 4 seed out of the LPL, and they continue to perform like it. Player of the series for me is going to go to Krako. You know, we keep talking about, oh, Krako's going to have those good games and bad games, because that's what he's been throughout a majority of his career, but in the good seasons, that's not who Krako is. When things are working for Krako's teams, like look at 2022 Sandbox, like as a great example of this, he really wasn't inconsistent at all. He was just really good every single game. His aggressive plays were rewarded because the rest of his team was willing to follow up on those plays, and that's kind of what we're seeing here on AL, is that even though he is going for these, you know, flippy, aggressive plays that typically would have gotten him in some trouble in previous splits, they're working out because the rest of his team is always in such a good spot to be able to capitalize. I think the Sandbox boys here on AL are actually doing a phenomenal job of being able to put them into great positions. Kale was also excellent in this series. You know, the Bard game in Game 1 kind of speaks for itself. He was such a playmaker, really able to set up the rest of his team for whatever they wanted to do, and Braum was an underrated pick here in Game 2. The reason Krako's getting player of the series is because he completely destroyed multiple lanes in that second game on the brand. We'll talk about Bertle in a second. Again, anybody who follows the channel knows I'm a huge Bertle defender, and I'm going to continue to be a Bertle defender, even with the dud of the series here, because it's not quite as simple as saying that Bertle is a problem for this team. He's not the problem on this team, but we'll get to that in a second. Shanks continues to prove that he is kind of a world-class mid laner right now. Haichao has been phenomenal over the course of this year. He has really emerged as one of the more interesting mid laners in all of the LPL. I think Haichao was the best player on LGD by far, and Shanks still went toe-to-toe and was, you know, about as relevant as you could possibly be in those matchups. Ale obviously dominated the top lane with help from Krako, who he received a shit ton, quite frankly, of resources from in this series, but, you know, whatever ends up working works, so that's fine. And then Hope and Kale, like I said, were good. I thought Kale was a bit better than Hope, but I'm not trying to take anything away from Hope. Kale was just really good. Anyone's Legend is one of the best teams in the LPL at the moment, and that's really, really cool. And then for LGD on the other side, I still think the blame is being put in the wrong spot for this team. People will continue to look at Bertle as a liability, and as I've said multiple times over the course of this year, I think it's just like you're taking a reputation from 3 years ago and you're pretending like that's the player that he is now. It's ridiculous. He has grown so much over the past 3 years, and he was a huge asset to not only this team, but to Sandbox last year as well. And I think people just like, they look at the Damwon days and they see that he wasn't ready for that and that he played poorly, and they just assume that he's going to be bad the rest of his career. And then he has a series like this where he gets perma-ganked by Krako, especially in that second game on the Poppy. Game 1 is a little bit less defensible, although I do think Krako still beat him more than, you know, Ale beat him in the 1v1. But game 2, like, what was he supposed to do? In fact, he made a brilliant play on the Poppy in the back half of the game in the Baron fight that almost won them the game. And, you know, I'm not going to try and sit here and say that it was all Bertle's fault, but the game plan was to take Bertle out of this, and it succeeded. He is the dud of the game because he was targeted relentlessly by AL, and, you know, Krako did a great job of shutting him down. He was the one that was receiving a lot of the negative plays, you know, for LGD, and unfortunately, that means you're dud of the series, even if I don't think that reflects his individual skill level. I think that this has a lot more to do with the fact that bot lane is starting to regress a bit. Jin Zhao just isn't very good. He'll have games every once in a while that look okay, and I think that that is something to be, you know, you're all right with that. There are worse supports in the league that don't have any good games. At least Jin Zhao gives you like 3 or 4 every single year, but, you know, Meteor is really not that great of an early game jungler. I know people love Meteor, and I know I'm low on Meteor, and it feels weird to say that, but this guy truly is like closer to being a one-trick than he is to being a top-tier LPL jungler. He is a team fighter. That is what he does. Like, he's not a good early game jungler, and you can live with that. Like, if you have someone like Haichao in the mid lane that can win consistently, Bertle's been great in lane. If you have those guys, and Xiaoya has taken a step up in terms of his development, if you have those guys, then you can hide Meteor's lack of ability to play fast, and especially in this meta where team fighting's more important, you know, there are some positives to that, but when you have a jungler like Krako who is going to try to run the game quickly, Meteor just can't keep up with that, and that's what's going to keep him out of that upper tier of junglers. I do want to give some positives. Xiaoya continues development even if some of his positioning was bad. Haichao is one of the best players on a bad team in the world right now. Like, he truly is amazing in this mid lane, and he continues to show that. Shanks is not a pushover, and Haichao held his own for a majority of this series. Like, there are good things on LGD, but it still is a miracle that they're in Group Ascend, and I don't think they're going to be able to do much with it. And then for AL on the other side, they're a really good team. This is probably a Worlds team right now, especially with everything else kind of collapsing in the LPL. There's really nobody else that I feel super comfortable about at the moment, and so, you know, good for AL. Hopefully they can keep it up. Then moving on now to day number 2, and we move back down to Group Nirvana to see OMG take on RNG. And OMG is going to pick up a 2-0 win, and not just a 2-0 win, a convincing 2-0 win. This is just embarrassing for RNG at this point. They are not just one of the worst teams in the LPL. They are the worst team in the LPL right now, by the way. They are one of the worst teams in the world. Like, they are there with Bro and with Rogue and with Shopify Rebellion in that low cluster of just like, what are we doing right now? And for RNG, as an org to be in that conversation, it's legit just disgusting. Like, they are horrible. There is nothing good going on this team right now. We're going to talk about it when we get into their section. For OMG, they've made a roster change. Angel is back in. You know, we expected this. I wasn't expecting Angel to stay out for the rest of the year. You know, him coming back in, you know, here in Group Nirvana, I think makes sense. But Tianjin is in the jungle. Now, on paper, I think this is a downgrade. It's no secret that I'm a bit of a Tianjin hater. I think his tape is way overhyped. His LDL tape is certainly overhyped. The dude is basically a 2-trick, and he was really bad on IG, and a lot of it was his fault, but there were signs of him being a good player from ahead. He just was so rarely able to get early game leads. That was something he really struggled with. Well, he got his 1-trick in this game. He got his Rengar, and honestly, he didn't have to play the Maokai, the Sejuani, you know, kind of the other 2-trick. I guess if you're a 2-trick and one of them's Maokai, you can kind of put Sejuani into that category as well. He played the champs that he was good at. Like, he played the things he knew how to play, and it worked out for him. He's going to get player of the series. I still want to see more out of Tianjin, as much as I do want to praise this performance. There are a couple concerns. First of all, you know, Rengar in game number 1, he's a 1-trick, and he gave it to him, and that's not really ideal. Sejuani in game 2, he played really well, and that was a much more encouraging game, in my opinion, towards what I'm expecting to see from Tianjin long-term. But a bigger concern for me is that he was going into Geju in this one, who I think I could have won this jungle matchup as hard as Tianjin did. That's nothing to try to take away from Tianjin in this series. I think he was good, but Geju was awful. Like, truly unplayable in these 2 games, and we'll get to that. It's just hard to get a really good read on how important Tianjin was to this actual win, because his opponent was not even trying out there. Like, he truly just completely threw it away. Angel was really good. Starry was really good. We're going to talk more about Starry as we go further along into the week, but was very impressed with him. We'll see if he starts to figure things out. I was a little bit lower on him in terms of his LDL tape. That's a bit of a running trend here in the LPL. I think people overhype LDL prospects a lot more than you get in other regions. You know, I think a lot of people love their young players, but LPL fans in particular see anybody who does well in the LDL and is immediately like, that person's gonna, you know, be the next star at the LPL level. I think Starry was just a little bit too risky here for OMG. Still don't agree with them moving in that way instead of Abel, but he looked really good in this series. So hopefully that's a sign of development, because that's all you really want to see. You know, Harry was fine, PP God was fine. OMG was fine. I mean, they looked like the worst team in the entire league for basically the entirety of the qualification, split. So to see them come out here and win their first series in Group Nirvana, it's a good sign, even if it is against the worst team in the league, confirmed now in RNG. And truly, like, RNG has some problems. Geju is done of the series. I get it. This guy is like perma rank 1 on both the Chinese server and like the Korean server. Like, I understand this guy's been like a solo queue superstar for a long time. That doesn't translate immediately to pro. There are a lot of differences between solo queue dominance and pro dominance. Sometimes you can make that transition work. There have been players that have just been able to pick it up, but what I'm saying is that it's a different skill set. Some players have that immediately and some players don't. Geju, I'm sure, can learn it, but God, he was horrible in this series. I mean, unplayably bad in this series. Clear choice for Dud of the series, was miserable, especially in that second game on the Lilia. I like Juice in the top lane. I think he's more interesting than what ZDZ was offering you, but he's going to have his hiccups as well. He was not good here against Harry, who's been a disaster on the other side here. Huanfeng, Awandi, whatever. Like, this is probably Huanfeng's worst series, but he has been the only player even remotely trying to win games for RNG. Tongyuan was honestly fine here. Like, I really don't have a problem, but Angel was way better, and so I guess that's kind of the negative there, is that Tongyuan is never the better mid laner in any of the matchups that he plays. There are positives and negatives for RNG generally, but the positives are like, oh, we maybe have someone who is trying to win. Like, if those are your positives, it's not a great spot to be in as a pretty legendary and historical organization here in RNG, so not a great spot, especially when the top side looks this bad. But for OMG, they just won a game. They won a series. They went 2-0. That's really good. And hopefully Tianjin can kind of show that this wasn't a flash in the pan. I may have been lower on him on IG, but I'm never rooting for a player to fail. I definitely really like Zhao Fang, and so I'm not entirely sure this is going to be an upgrade, even if I do think Tianjin fits the meta a bit better, but it's just something we're gonna have to wait and see. I'll take a wait and see approach on it. And then moving on to our second series here of day number 2, and it's kind of an interesting one. 2 0-2 teams, at least at the moment. JD Gaming taking on FunPlus Phoenix. That is in game score, not in series score, but JDG is going to get their first win here of the Group Ascend, and they're going to pick up the 2-1 win. FPX gave them more trouble than I think they were anticipating, and honestly, this wasn't a great look from JDG, but they still were able to pull out the win. I think they've looked better so far in the summer split. I think that's a bit counterintuitive to what a lot of people are saying, but I do think they have been better in summer than they have been in spring. I think Ruler and Missing in particular have definitely looked better. Yagao, I think, has definitely looked better here in summer than he did in the spring split. Sheer, I think getting a full-time run is definitely going to make this team better, but at the end of the day, this team runs on Kanavi. He is the guy for JD Gaming, and if he is winning, they're going to win. If he is not carrying the game, they're probably going to lose. And really is as simple as that. He's going to get player of the series here. Was amazing on the Lee Sin in game number 1. Definitely ran that game. We'll talk about Milky Way in a second, but this really backs up everything I've been saying about Milky Way, where he's really good against players that he's better than, and when he's as good as the players that he's running into, he can sometimes struggle to be able to generate those same kinds of leads, and he's not the kind of player that plays great from behind, but, Kanavi is great at taking advantage of situations like that, so I can't even really blame Milky Way all that much. He was awesome in game 3, Karthus press button and kill everybody, haha, very funny, it is what it is here, but Kanavi is kind of the game definer for JDG. When he wins, they win. When he loses, they lose, and that was the case last week when Kanavi wasn't very good in that matchup, and, JDG ended up losing their first series of Group Ascend, and that really was not an ideal situation. Kanavi was really bad in that series, and, he is the lifeblood of JDG. He is going to carry them either up to the top or somewhere down into the middle, and I guess we'll have to see which way, but the rest of this team I do think is a bit undervalued right now in terms of their individual contributions. It's just not that they have a huge impact on the team. Yagao, I think, has definitely been better here in summer. In fact, I think Yagao individually has been really good. When you look at his lane matchups, Kara actually played really well here, and Kara has been getting better as the year has gone on, which I think is a good sign, but Yagao has continued to look very good in 1v1 matchups. Ruler and Missing, I think, are winning a lot harder than people are giving them credit for in the 2v2. Maybe they're not making the same kind of flashy plays, but they are still surviving, maybe outside of the Pyke in game number 2. And Sheer has his growing pains, but generally he is also fine, and I think it's the right move to keep him in on the top side. I think there are positives here for JD Gaming. I just think it's all going to run through Kanavi in terms of their positive plays. But for FPX on the other side, first of all, roster change. Zhao Laohu is out. ZDZ is in. This is a very strange move. Feels a bit lateral to me. I think Zhao Laohu's probably a bit better. I think he certainly has more upside, at least in terms of what you could expect on a game-to-game basis, but I don't think you're really getting all that much of a different performance out of these two. I think they're relatively similar players. I would group them in about the same tier, and so going to ZDZ, it's fine. I don't really understand why you're doing it outside of the controversy that happened earlier on this split, but I mean, they're making that decision either way, but he was not the one who lost them this series. It really just was kind of a bit of a team gap. Milky Way couldn't keep up with Kanavi, especially when he wasn't on the Karthus. you know, Care had all the resources and was kind of the carry of this series, but he's not a great carry. He's certainly not a great primary carry for a lot of these teams. He is really at his element and in his zone when he is the secondary carry for a really good team. That's kind of what he was in spring here with Milky Way doing a lot of the good things. Actually, Care was really not good at all in spring, but last year when Care was really good, when I was kind of on the Care train, he was a really good secondary carry. So I think that's going to be a better spot for him when he's asked to be the #1 guy like he was in this series. I just don't think that's going to be as consistent for him. You know, Dectim and Life, I think, have taken him a step back slightly. I still think they've been good for the most part. They're a big reason why this team is in the upper group anyways, but they were not great here. Life is actually going to get my dud of the series for the Nautilus and the Braum games. I think they were the weakest games anyone played in the series. I get it. He was player of the game in game 2. I'm not sure how strongly I feel about that. The Pyke game was a little inconsistent, but he was still making a lot of plays, and he definitely disrupted a lot of what JDG wanted to do, but outside of that, the Braum Nautilus not looking great, but I can't be too mad about FPX. I mean, winning a game off of JDG is actually a pretty good outcome, and there are going to be other teams that they should be able to beat in this group ascend, and, you know, 0-2 is basically expected. I don't feel very highly about this team. I don't think they are the top 4 or 5 team that people want them to be right now, and I think winning a game against JDG is honestly generally a good outcome for them, so I think they'll take this, and JDG, I think, you know, they'll take a win. I think they want to try to get a bit more consistent. They want to try to get a bit more versatile as the split goes along. But at least for now, like, picking up wins is the important part. You just need to get into a position where you're allowed to kind of build that rapport. So picking up wins here is very, very essential. It's a necessity for them at the moment. And then moving on now to day number 3, and we kick day 3 off with a pretty predictable matchup here between Thunder Talk and Invictus Gaming, where Thunder Talk is going to pick up the victory. I think this was pretty clear that Thunder Talk were the favorites going into a series like this. I know that they were back-to-back in terms of my power rankings, but IG is just one of those weird teams. They will randomly win games every once in a while that you just don't really understand why they're winning, and then they'll go out and lose like they're supposed to, because they're really not all that talented of a team. They really don't play all that well, but every once in a while they just like decide to be good at the macro part of the game, and it's kind of interesting to watch. But, you know, in a prediction sense, they're not someone that I'm going to put a lot of faith in, and Thunder Talk is an interesting team in Group Nirvana. I think that is the kind of context that you have to add to a statement like that. They are interesting in the context that they are playing other non-playoff teams, or at least other projected non-playoff teams, and so you can kind of expect them to be a little bit more, I don't know, feisty in this stage than they were in the first stage, and, you know, I think a lot of that skill is going to come out a little bit more now, and that's what we're seeing with UCal in the mid lane. This felt like, you know, spring UCal, 2023 UCal, where when he's going up against a player he is just straight up better than, he absolutely obliterates them. If he goes up against a team that he is better than, he just straight up obliterates them. He was a player that I was calling a top 5 mid laner in the LPL going into this split. That's how highly I view UCal, and this was just another kind of confirming performance on that regard. You know, he hasn't quite been as dominant, I would say, across the entire summer split. The group stage was a little bit rough for him, at least in terms of his standards. He wasn't getting destroyed or anything like that, but he wasn't dominating games in the same kind of way. I think having to play better competition like FPX and like JDG more frequently was probably a little bit, you know, tougher than, you know, going through the entirety of the LPL where he has these games where he just obliterates people. But now he's in Group Nirvana, and this is where he is going to get back to obliterating people, so good for UCal. Beishuan continues to look really good. He's actually been phenomenal, I would say, in summer. Maybe not phenomenal. That might be too big of a term, but he's been very good. Someone that I think a lot of people are sleeping on because very similar to what we've talked about with Bertle, people had that preconceived notion that he was awful and just kind of decided that he was bad regardless of how he played. For the most part, he's been nothing but a positive to this team this summer. He was awful in spring. Certainly not going to try and defend that. He was miserable in spring, but he's been really good in summer so far. Hoya still sucks, but at least he was able to survive in this matchup. 1xN and Feather are the definition of like a slightly below average bot lane here in the LPL. Feather is significantly worse than 1xN, but it's not like 1xN is dragging him up. He's just like an average AD carry, and Feather is a very below average support. So, you know, them being fine, them winning this matchup is certainly not good for IG on the other side, but I don't have huge trust in them. Thunder Talk's just one of those teams. I think they're going to do fine against these bad teams, but it doesn't change my thought that they're not a playoff team. And then for IG on the other side, their flaws are just so clear. Like, not only is this team really bad at drafting, because what is Game 2's draft? Like, truly, what are we attempting to do here? You're putting so much faith in Nenny in particular in the mid lane, and I get it. Nenny's been a pretty consistent player for your team, but consistent is the word I will use in the sense that he has been like the non-factor of the team, whereas everybody else has kind of lost games for them, specifically GLFS and Vampire have really not been consistent at all for them. Nenny has been fine in the mid lane. He's not losing super hard, but he's not winning super hard either. He's just kind of surviving in the mid lane, and you give him win the prio in the early game. It just feels very weird. Vampire makes game-losing plays so frequently. This guy is going to get another dud of the series. I get it. I understand that there is a fan club for Vampire and that people are really hopeful that he's going to turn things around, but this guy is just not ready for the LPL. How many weeks in a row do I have to tell people that this guy is not ready for the LPL before it's just like, I feel bad. His development and his growth as a player is getting stunted. He needs to go down to the LDL now. He is not ready for this level, and it continues to show with these backbreaking moments at the end of games. So, IG's not very good, even if you did get okay performances out of players like Nenny, and, You Should Know Me was fine, even if I don't like the Jax prio. Like, there's certain pieces here that I think are okay, but IG's not a consistent team, and this is more closer to their skill level than I think what they showed last week, and Thunder Talk should be able to take down a team like that. It doesn't change my thought on who they are, 13, 12, 14, somewhere in that range I think is fair for Thunder Talk, but, it's nice to see that UCal can still beat up on Scrubs when he needs to. And then moving on to our second series of day number 3, and a lot of people called this a fraud watch kind of series, and I don't agree with that, but it certainly was an interesting one. It's LNG Esports taking on Weibo Gaming, the two teams that everybody's been using the buzzword of fraud all year long. Anybody who's followed the channel knows I'm so freaking tired of hearing that word. It genuinely is starting to get under my skin. These two teams faced off, and LNG won, as was predicted. I think LNG was the better team throughout a majority of this split. I think, I had them at number 5 in my power rankings. Weibo Gaming picking up a game here isn't too bad. I think some people will criticize the gameplay of Game 3. They're right to do so, but I think some people are kind of downplaying how good Games 1 and 2 were for both of the respective winning teams. Game 2 was super clean, I would say, from Weibo. Game 1 was pretty clean from LNG. I think there's a lot to like from both teams in this series. I don't think it's nearly as dire as a lot of people are making it out to be. When you see the online reaction to a series like this, like if you go to Reddit, it's all just like coughing baby versus coughing baby type of stuff online. I don't think that accurately represents these games at all. I think people, shout out to LPL fans. I'm no longer going to say no offense because at some point that phrase can only carry so much weight. At some point I am like talking about these people in a negative light, so I guess I'll just say that. Like the LPL fandom on Reddit and on social media generally is just wrong. Like they're bad. Like they're just not good at analyzing the games, in my opinion, and I think that this was another example of that. We'll get into that as we go further along. Gala was awesome here. I mean, he's been awesome all year, and even with LNG really struggling in both spring and summer, I think it's always been Gala where you've been like, yeah, this guy's still trying his best. I think Hong is still a really good support. I think this bot lane in general has been a huge positive, and Weibo's bot lane has been super disappointing in the summer split. That I will definitely get to, but Gala's been really good. Give him 3 games of Ezreal, he's probably going to do pretty well, and that's exactly what we saw here. I don't want people downplaying how well he played here. I think he genuinely was excellent. Scout was great on the Tristana in Game 3. That's a pretty traditional thing for us to say. Tristana's always been one of his better champions. It's nice to see Scout have good games. I get Zhao, who's not exactly been consistent, but, Scout winning is always a good thing to see because he has been kind of up and down over the course of this year. Weiwei, I think, has really settled in. It's really weird because he was so bad in spring for this team stylistically. It felt like he was never going to click with Scout individually or Gala individually in terms of being able to get on the same page for the plays they wanted to make in the early and in the mid game. But honestly, Weiwei's changed his style a lot, and I think this AP jungle meta has actually helped him quite a bit. He's not been perfect. He certainly had his struggles at the beginning of summer, but he has settled into being fine for this team, which I think is all they really need. Zika was my player of the week in the first week here, and he continued to be fine. I don't think anything was extraordinary for LNG, maybe other than Gala on the Ezreal, who I do think is excellent, but this was just a pretty standard solid win for a team that kind of needed it. And for Weibo, I don't think they look nearly as bad as some people are going to make them out to be. They were super indecisive in game number 3, and their macro was really poor in that game. They had an opportunity to win it, and quite frankly, they should have won it. They played super passive, super safe, but there are worse things to talk about when it comes to teams in the LPL than how Weibo played this game number 3. I think people are just frustrated because there's somehow still this expectation that they should be a top 4 team. When you think about them as a team around number 7 or number 8 in the power rankings, this is kind of the output that you would expect for a team in that range, and honestly, I'm really not all that concerned by it. What I am concerned by is Crisp in the support position. Now, I'm really not afraid on this channel to go out and talk about the things I get wrong. I think there is a lot of talk sometimes in my comment section about how I'm unwilling to change my opinions when it's so obvious there is a difference. Like, I'm unwilling to change the fact that I think Tarzan's really good because he's been the best player for Weibo. Like, where are we trying to go with that? He has been awesome this split, a bit inconsistent. Hate the Kazakhs in game number 1, but one of the things I'm happy to change my opinion on is Crisp if he's going to continue playing like this. He was a world-class support last year. He really was that good, but Worlds, clearly something happened to him mentally. Like, he was not good at that tournament. He came back in spring. He was okay, but really not like that upper echelon support that you would expect him to be, that he's kind of been throughout his whole career. And honestly, he's been horrible so far in summer. The only thing that I think could give Weibo fans some solace and Crisp fans some solace is that support is a really hard role to play in the current meta. We're seeing a ton of supports really struggle to adapt to how the AP jungle meta has really taken over, and they're just kind of getting picked off without really doing a whole ton. I think Crisp could potentially be falling into that, but he should be better than that. Like, he should be a world-class support, and he's just not even been close to that over the course of this year. He's done of the series. The Leona game in particular in Game 3 was awful. Just super passive, not really doing anything. I get that you're playing with Ziggs Corky. Like, I understand that you maybe don't want to be the most aggressive player in the world, but, like, you got to do something eventually, and it just felt like he was unwilling to try and make any plays, and he's felt scared for a lot of this year. Crisp is really starting to lose a lot of my trust because, genuinely, the tape has been horrific so far in 2024, but, again, the Tarzan hate is super forced. He continues to be the only player on this team that's actively doing anything in the early game. Light is absolutely nothing. KDA monster at the current moment, and that's really something that people have criticized him for over the course of his career that I've pushed back on. When you look at his time on LNG in particular, I thought he was, like, especially in 2022, the only player trying to win games. He was really good for this team last year. It's really unfortunate that he has kind of turned into that over the course of summer split so far. Xiao, who's been a disaster, even if he has been better so far in the, the actual summer split, the qualification series, and Breathe has really been disappointing. So Weibo has its problems, but I don't think they're all directed in the same way or nearly as extreme as a lot of people would make them out to be. I think this team is still fine, and then LNG is actually good. Like, this was a top 5 team in my power rankings. Another example, in my opinion, of why you don't overreact to some outcomes. Like, LNG looked a little inconsistent at the beginning of the year, but the underlying signs showed that they should get better. Scout was really the only player I had super big worries about, but, it's Scout. You would expect him to not be horrible through the whole split, but with Gala and Hong playing as well as they were, Weiwei felt like he was getting more comfortable. I felt like LNG was going to get back on track, and that's exactly what they've done. They've gotten back on track. They're not perfect. They still have a lot of things to work on, but they're certainly better than what they were in spring. And then moving on now to day number 4, kind of our middle day here, if you will, in the LPL, and we kicked it off with kind of an upset between Ultra Prime and Rare Atom, where Ultra Prime is going to pick up the 2-0 series win. This is definitely a bit of a shock for me. It felt like Ultra Prime was really falling off, that their confidence had really shot, that a lot of the advantages they were generating at the beginning of the split with Hacker and with Nickit really being the 2 best players weren't going to be as sustainable moving into the second half, and a team like Rare Atom was, in my opinion, one of the favorites to come out of Group Nirvana as one of the better teams. They are certainly one of the more mechanically talented teams at this level, and they certainly should be one of the teams that is competing to make a playoff spot, to at least compete in the play-ins. And for them to drop this, not only, as a loss, like a series loss, but 0-2, that's really bad for them. This is really not an outcome that I think they were looking for. Maybe Ultra Prime is better than I'm giving them credit for, but certainly not a result I anticipated. And you can see that in my power rankings. Player of the series is going to go to Ching Tian in the top lane. I have been mega critical of him over the course of this split. He has been horrible. Probably the worst top laner in the LPL, although there is very fierce competition for that role. There are so many top laners at this level that are just absolute garbage. Cube got replaced, and so I can't quite be on that train anymore, but Hoya has certainly been making a strong argument. Ching Tian has been making just as strong, if not a stronger argument in that conversation, but he came out in this series and was super influential. Not only was he not losing early for basically no reason in good matchups, but he was actually winning, and his picks were super useful. Not only was the Darius great, it's kind of his signature champion, it was really good in game number 1, did really well into the Cassante, but Cassante was unkillable for him in game number 2. There was just really no way for Rare Atom to be able to break through with Sejuani plus Yone plus Misfortune. Like, there was no way they were ever going to break through Cassante plus Leona. There's just absolutely no way to win those fights. So Ching Tian being super useful in this series was actually very consequential overall, and that's a really good thing. Hopefully this is, the start of some confidence being built for him. I'm not expecting much. I don't think this is like the turnaround for him. I think this was just a good situation for him, but if this is going to be the start of him playing better, then that's all we can really ask for. I think there were also positives for the other players that have been struggling here. Doggo, who has been really rough, I would say, over the last couple of weeks, was significantly better in this series. He also wasn't getting absolutely clapped at the beginning of the game, which was a big problem problem for him over the past couple of weeks. Yuakai, I think, has really dropped off in terms of his skill level, but he was generally fine this week. Hacker has maintained being the best player on this team throughout basically all of this year, and he continued to be super important. He was great on the Brand in particular in that game too. Brand is just such a power pick in the meta right now. If you're able to dominate on him, it's just a free win, essentially, in terms of how pro play has gone recently, but it was a good performance against a very good jungler in Xiaohao on the other side of this matchup, and Nickit definitely looked better. It's funny, this was kind of a revenge series for Jue on the other side. He was a rookie for Ultra Prime in spring. Like this past split, he gets replaced by another rookie in Nickit that they think has more upside, and unfortunately for Jue, Ultra Prime definitely looks like they've gotten the better end of that deal, because Nickit looks really good, and even if he has struggled recently, this was another good performance from him. So, you know, seeing Qingtian and Doggo and Yuakai and Nickit, who have all really struggled, I would say, over the past, week or two, come back out and look really good in this series, it's a good sign. I'm not going to completely flip my opinion on Ultra Prime after one series, but at least we know it's still there as long as they're able to get it out more consistently. And then for Rare Adam, this is just a disappointing loss. You can't really get away with this. This is a bad loss in terms of your station, your standing in the group Nirvana. Like, you needed to be in a better spot here, and I think you just underperformed. Basically, everybody on this team played poorly. Assume was fine, I guess, but it's not like he was doing a lot. He just was capitalizing when there were situations to get gold, but everybody else in this team was kind of a letdown. Jue is going to get my dud of the series, but if you want to give this to Vikla, if you want to give this to Xiaoshu in the top lane, I think both of those are reasonable candidates as well. Jue was just the most noticeable in terms of the bad plays that were happening. A lot of the engages were super negative for the team overall. And again, storyline-wise, going into your former org, you have to play a little bit better than this, and he just wasn't able to do that here. Vikla was also pretty terrible. Losing to Yuakai is really not all that good, and it's really frustrating because I think people are going to forget just how good he was in the group stage here, the qualification stage, because so far he's been really bad, like in both of their series in the actual summer split. If that continues, if he continues to be what he was in spring rather than kind of what he was showing at the beginning of summer, I'm going to be really disappointed. Xiaohao got 2 games of Sejuani. It's kind of been the carry of this team. Definitely shocked to see them want to go in that direction, but he's a good Sejuani player. It's just maybe not the circumstance. I think you want him to be on something that can actively win you the game, especially when Hacker is on Brand on the other side of this matchup, and Xiaoshu definitely was worse than Qingtian, but really, what was he supposed to do? I mean, in game 1, he was supposed to do a lot more, but game 2, Renekton into K'Sante, and K'Sante has gold. Like, really, what are you supposed to do in that matchup? So, it's just a tough loss for Rare Adam that probably shouldn't have happened. This is definitely going to be a huge negative for me. They definitely should have won this series, and them losing it is not a good look. And then for Ultra Prime, it's a good win. I mean, who knows? Maybe this is still a top 10 team. We were talking about that for a little bit when we were in the qualifications part, the promotions part. So who knows? Like, maybe this team actually is good. I would bet probably not, that this is definitely kind of a streaky, inconsistent team, but at least they are still capable of some of the good signs and the consistency that they showed at the beginning part of summer. And then moving on to our second series of day number 4, and it is a clash between two teams that came out of the same group. Ninjas in Pyjamas taking on Anyone's Legend, and just like we saw in that group, AL is going to pick up another victory here. They're going to move to 3-0, 6-0 to start off the group ascend. This team is legit. There is nothing else left to see. At the very least, this is going to be one of the harder teams to beat in the LPL. I'm not going to try and sit here and say that they are guaranteed to make their way to Worlds or something like that, but they are better than a lot of the teams that they are getting compared to from past LPL seasons. I see a lot of, hopefully they're not the Victory 5 of this season. I hate to break it to Victory 5 fans. They're way better than Victory 5 was in that, like, rookie run that they were on. Like, V5 had a lot of momentum behind them, and they were upsetting a lot of people, but that run was always a little bit fraudulent in terms of the times that they played a lot of those teams, and, it was definitely interesting. I've talked about it before on this channel. This AL team is not frauds. Like, they are not to be questioned in that way. Like, this team is legit. I feel very firmly that this is one of the scarier teams in the world. A player of the series is once again going to go to Krako in the jungle. I want to give Krako and Kale the respect that they deserve, because Shanks is getting a lot of the praise, and he deserves it. Like, this guy is playing like one of the best mid laners in the world right now, but I don't think it's fair to say that Shanks is, like, carrying the team. Krako and Kale have been unfreaking believable for this team. The Sandbox boys have really been dominant, and we have to remember how good they were in 2022. This might even be better than that. In fact, I would definitely say that Krako is playing better than he played in 2022. Kale is probably playing just about as well as he played in 2022, and that's really just kind of to show how well this is working for AL right now and how happy you have to be about that. Ale has obviously been a massive upgrade in the top lane. I also do want to address something, though, really quickly. You see a lot of comments about Tabe coming in as the head coach here, and the manager, if you will. I agree that that clearly has had some positive impact, but, I've had some questions in the comments about why I don't talk about that as often, and why I'm, associating a lot of the change with Ole coming into the top lane, or this team just finding better form in the summer split, why I don't talk about coaches in general. And, I said this in a comment, but I want to say it in the video as well, because I think it's important to make the note. I can't judge coaches in the same way that I judge players. I can watch a player go out there and play. I can watch, the individual decisions that they're making on a micro level. I have no idea what these coaches do. For me to sit here and try to tell you, how good a coach is, or, what impact a coach can have, honestly, it's just a guess. Like, any analyst that isn't inside the doors itself that is trying to tell you how good a coach is honestly just lying to you. Like, I don't have no other way to say that other than being blunt about it, but we can take circumstantial evidence. We can talk about the fact that teams get better when Tabe comes in, and that's certainly something that I have, thought about and attributed, and I'm certainly not trying to take that lightly. But as you guys know, one of the things I push back on as a data analyst in my daytime, in my day job, is that results-based thinking is not the way to go. Like, just because results keep happening doesn't mean that the reason that that is happening is one thing or another. You have to delve into the specifics of those situations. I certainly wouldn't think the other way, that if one coach went to a couple of teams and they just started losing, I wouldn't immediately think that that coach is cursed, or that that coach is absolutely horrible at their job, in the same way that I wouldn't think that that coach is perfect and excellent and immediately changes a team once they join. They're just not quantifiable by us because we don't actually see what they do. I'm sure Tabe is great. I'm not trying to talk down on Tabe. I'm not qualified to talk on coaches, and I think any analyst that tries to sell you that they are qualified without actually being inside those doors is, lying. Like, they quite frankly, I'm not going to try and do what a lot of other people do, which is analyze things that I don't actually have facts on. I'm going to stick to the things that I can analyze, and I'm going to tell you what I know of that, and I'm not going to speak on the things that I don't know of. So, whether you like that or not, that's the approach that I'm going to take with coaches. And I know there's a lot of conversation around Tabe, and I certainly do think it's helped this team, but I want to congratulate the players that are playing really well. Krako, Kale, Shanks, Ale, Hope has been better. AL is clicking on a lot of cylinders. I don't think it's just a coaching change for them. And then for Ninjas in Pyjamas, there's just something wrong with this team. They are the definition of, mid, but in a bad way. They're not a middle-tier team. They're above that. They've been number 6 in my power rankings. I don't think they're going to last long in that spot if they continue to play the way that they are, but there are just so many issues with the way that they play the game. They rely so much on mid lane, and when mid lane doesn't win, then they just lose. They're JDG, but, scaled up to 100, where if JDG, Kanavi is so important to JDG Gaming, Rookie is way more important to Ninjas in Pyjamas than anybody is to their team at a top level in the world. I can't even really think of another player who has this much influence on whether or not their team wins or loses games. Rookie was fine in this series, not super problematic. He certainly could have been better in game 2, but he needed to be better because this team can't win without him. Shanji's going to get dead of the series again. He's starting to regress back to spring form. I think Fodak and Juo have been miserable so far this summer, and that's really scary because it finally felt like they were figuring something out in spring. Aki, I think, has been fine, certainly not the problem, but Krako was definitely better. The Nocturne didn't exactly do anything in game 2. This team just has real flaws, and I think it's going to hold them out from being an actual contender. That top 4 finish in spring definitely does not look repeatable at the moment, and that's disappointing. But for AL, I'm just so happy, whatever the reason, for them to be able to get here. I've been a huge fan of this org for quite a long time. I've always hyped them up. I've always believed in them over the years, and it's never been rewarded. I've always put them way too high in the power rankings, only for them to disappoint. This is finally the year where the roster actually performed to the caliber that they were supposed to, where my hyping up of them in the pre-split actually turns out to be rewarded, and I'm really just excited to say that. Then moving on now to day number 5, and we keep the train rolling here with LGD Gaming taking on JD Gaming, and as expected, they pick up a 2-0 series win. LGD is just so overmatched at this level. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if they didn't win a single series coming out of Group Ascend. It's awesome that they're here. That's really the mentality that I think they are going to take moving into the second half of this split, is that it's awesome that they are here. It's awesome that they made it, and they're going to have a chance to play their way into the playoffs no matter what happens here, because, even the worst teams in Group Ascend get into the play-ins, and so they're going to have an opportunity to do something, but they're not going to have a ton of confidence coming out of this stage. They're just not good enough to go toe-to-toe with these teams regularly. JDG, even when they're struggling, are simply just better than LGD, as we saw here. Player of the series is, once again, going to go to Kanavi. I'm actually very shocked to see kind of the mixed reception on Kanavi, because not only do people sit here and think that, oh, Kanavi is carrying JD Gaming, which I do kind of agree with. He is definitely the best player on the team right now, and is really the one that they are focusing a lot of their resources and their pressure through, especially in the mid game. But at that same time, people are really anti Kanavi being like one of the best junglers in the world. It's a very weird place for him to sit. One of the comments on the post-match thread here was talking about, Kanavi proving that he's still maybe the best jungler in the world, and it got a ton of downvotes, and I'm honestly just surprised to see that. I've gone on record saying that at worst, he's a top 2 jungler in the world right now. It's him versus Canyon. Canyon's had better form in 2024, but Kanavi's on a worse team. It's really just kind of up to what you want to do. Canyon's role is significantly easier than Kanavi's, but Canyon has performed better. Like, I really do think it's just kind of personal preference at that point. Kanavi was the best jungler in the world last year, and it wasn't particularly close. I really don't think there is a lot pointing to the fact that he isn't still the best jungler in the world. Like, all things equal, would Kanavi be just as good as Canyon on Gen G? Probably. Like, that's kind of my take on it. I'm really shocked to see that people are kind of low in that sense on Kanavi. They're not low on Kanavi, but I think he deserves to be in the best jungler in the world conversation. It doesn't seem like a lot of other people are willing to, kind of lump him in there, but I definitely am. I think Ruler continues to play really well here in summer. I think a lot of the spring negativity has worn off on some of his, summer performances so far. I still think that he is playing a lot better in summer so far than he was in spring. I think he's gotten a lot of the juice back. He's still not the star that you're kind of hoping he would be, but he's not making those weird mistakes, especially in the early game, that were kind of prevalent in the spring split. So that's good. Missing, I think, has been more consistent. Yagao's been fine. Sheer was really good in this series, and that's a good sign. JD Gaming, just in general, like, they are a good team. They're a little bit too inconsistent for me to guarantee that this is going to be one of the best teams in the entire world. Like, they're going to be on the level of a Bilibili or a top esports, but they absolutely should be, and so long as they can start getting their ancillary pieces together, they will be. But for LGD on the other side, again, this team is fine. I feel bad for them because they are just overmatched in this group. They're going to need to try to pick up wins against teams like FunPlus Phoenix and, maybe an inconsistent Weibo Gaming in order to try and find a spot for them to land here, because outside of that, I do think it's going to be pretty difficult for them to even remotely stay in these series, as we saw here. Dead of the series was kind of hard because everybody played Jin Zhao's going to get it. I'm really not a big fan of where Jin Zhao has been at over the past couple of weeks, but in reality, this is just kind of who he is. He's an inconsistent support who at times will look good, at times will look bad. Bertle also had another rough series. I think some of those Poppy ultimates were definitely, something to watch. I'm not just going to defend him blindly because I do think he's better than his reputation. I'm going to call out when he doesn't play well, and he didn't play well in this series, and that's certainly something that is worth noting, but I still don't think he's the biggest problem. Meteor has no pressure in the early game, and, if he is going to try and play for these team fights, then he needs to be able to survive on his laners winning, and Haichao's just not in a position to do that here. Xiao, I think, continues to get better, and I think he's a big reason why this team has improved so much over the course of the year, but it's not enough to go into Ruler and missing. Like, he's not at the point where he's going to be able to do that consistently, so LGD still in a rough spot. Doesn't really change here. 0-4 is pretty indicative, and JDG, they're above 500. That's good. I think Kanavi had an excellent week, and he continues to be the focal point, but I want to see this team get more well-rounded, get more versatile, because right now they feel very one-dimensional. That dimension is very good, but it's never good to be one-dimensional at the top. Then moving on to our second series of day number 5, and it's another one that could be considered an upset here. Edward Gaming taking on OMG, and OMG picks up their second win. They're 2-0 right now in Group Nirvana. That is certainly not what I was anticipating after how their, qualification series ended up going. The beginning part of this summer split has been a bit of a disaster for OMG in basically every area. Basically everyone has fallen off. They've had to make a couple of rosters changes and substitutions. Harry and Tianjin have obviously come in. Starry has really not been that guy so far this split, but give it some time and things are starting to work out. Things are certainly starting to get better for them. Starry was excellent in this series. He's gonna get player of the series super easily. He was very valuable to what OMG wanted to do. I think he was by far the most important carry across all of these games. I think game number 1's obviously super weird, and we'll get into that when we talk more about some other players on OMG that I think were a bit more, impactful in game number 1. Not that Starry wasn't, just that their contributions were more important to that game in particular, but Starry dominated game 3, got super fed on the Kai'Sa, and just completely took over the game. Like, there was nothing that EDG was going to be able to do. They got outplayed by Starry, and that's not really a great sign for EDG. Starry has really struggled at this level at the start of his career. You know, I was low on his LDL tape. It's not a shock. I'm typically low on LDL AD carries. I think that they are overhyped in terms of their prospect status in comparison to some of the players that we do get that are very good coming out of the LDL, but Starry's actually kind of interesting right now. This week was really good from him. If he's going to be able to keep this up and become kind of a middle of the pack, upper middle of the pack kind of AD carry, that's really good. This week was better than any of the other AD carries that have all been touted in a similar position to Starry, like 1xN and Assume, and, you know, all of those players that continuously get talked about like they are the best AD carries of all time that, you know, never have exactly impressed me. This was better than that, in my opinion, from Starry. So hopefully he can keep that up. I'm sure PP God is definitely helping in that transition, but he has not had a particularly good individual year. Hopefully the mentorship is definitely starting to seep through. I think Tianjin definitely deserves a shout out here. It's such a weird series to talk about for Tianjin because the bad was really bad from him. Like, this felt for a lot of the series like IG Tianjin, where it's like, man, you just gotta chill out. You gotta play with your team. You gotta try and figure out how to be a little bit more controlled in terms of the plays that you're making. That was his biggest problem on IG for the entire time that he was starting, is that it never really felt like he was in good communication with the players that he was playing with. But in the big moments, he was really influential. He ends up getting player of the game in game number 1 after going like 0-7, because that one engage at the end of the game, really the 2 engages at the end of the game, were huge on the Vi. When it really mattered, he was the one that was stepping up, even if he had kind of been inting up until that point and really giving EDG a lot of gold and experience. And so it's a really interesting dichotomy. He needs to clean up the play. That is not debatable. Like, he has to clean up the bad moments. There's really nothing else to say about that. Even the biggest Tianjin fans in the world are like, he's got to clean up the questionable moments, but the good is really good from him right now. He's looking way better than he did on IG in terms of just kind of actively going for good plays in the back half of games. Typically, he would roll over and die. That's not happened here for OMG, so we'll see what happens, but I'm already way more intrigued after 1 week of him on OMG than I ever was with him on IG, so that's a good sign. Angel continues to look okay. Harry's fine on the top side. Really not anything consequential in the solo lanes this series for OMG, but man, if these new additions are actually going to turn out to be good, that's going to be a shock to me because it did not look good at the start of the split. I'll just say that. And then for EDG on the other side, I hate being so low on this team, but I'm just so out on them. Like, I just do not think they are a good team. They lack in so many key areas. They really should not have lost game number 1. In fact, there's really no excuse for them losing game number 1. They just weren't good enough. Dud of the series for me is going to go to Jeje in the jungle. Like, what else is there to say? Jeje is a part of the problem at this point. There is enough talent on this team where you can no longer say, well, it's Jeje and a bunch of, you know, rookies and a bunch of players that he has to guide through. That can no longer be the excuse. He's just not playing well for this EDG team, and that's really disappointing. This is no longer a top 5 jungler in the LPL. This is no longer the guy that went and won Worlds. I just don't think that that player is here right now. Maybe you can get him back in a better situation, but he is just as much of a problem as anybody else is on this team right now. Leave continues to be really good in the low pressure moments and really bad in the high pressure moments, which is a really bad place to sit if you're an AD carry. Probably the most important role to be good in the high pressure moments. Wink was also not very good here. I think it's important to note that, you know, Wink has been kind of the best, most consistent player on this team over the course of this split, but he can have his bad games too, and this was one of them. Cryan was actually pretty solid. I think the Corki in particular was actually pretty good from him. I know the Malzahar is going to get more looks, but really didn't hate him on Corki, and Solo Kill is someone I actually am a fan of. I continue to see a lot of really good glimpses out of him in terms of his 1v1ing ability, and I think he has a future as an LPL top laner, but this team does not have a future as, like, a successful team in terms of the way that they're playing right now. People were hyping them up coming out of the group stage as like this team that could easily make, you know, top 10 if everything were to go right. I was much lower on them in terms of my expectations, and unfortunately, that has absolutely come to fruition. This is not a good team, and I think we're seeing that. And for OMG, I don't know if this is a good team. They're probably not a good team, but I still don't, like, know for sure. Tianjin and Starry have to keep up their pace. They really are going to be the two that define where OMG goes. Could this team finish in the top 3 or 4 of this group? Yes, that is totally possible because Group Nirvana is full of bad teams. All you got to do is keep winning, and they're 2-0. That's a great start, but a lot of their winning right now is on the backs of players that have notoriously been inconsistent or not perfect over the course of their careers. And so there is a lot that kind of has to go right for them, but right now it is going right. So that's a good sign. And then moving on to our third series here of day number 5, as we are in the Super Week section of week number 2 here, we had a top-of-the-table clash. Probably the two best teams in the LPL right now, Top Esports taking on Bilibili Gaming, both in their first series here in Group Ascend. And Bilibili is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. There were some questions and concerns about this because of their individual performances at the Esports World Cup. Obviously, I didn't watch the games. I wasn't really all that interested in the tournament, and so I don't know exactly what went down in a couple of these series. BLG ended up losing to T1. Top Esports ended up beating Gen.G. Those are crazy results, but I do want to implore people to not take them too seriously. I can't stress this enough. Best of threes are not a good indicator at the top level for who the best teams in the world are, especially at a tournament like the Esports World Cup, which is in the middle of a regular season. There are a lot of factors. Like, this wasn't MSI, which was the culmination of a spring split of a meta that they had been building towards. This is literally a tournament that's dragged and dropped into the middle of the regular season, where a lot of these teams, BLG in particular, have been experimenting super heavily. Like, BLG has tried a lot of weird stuff at the start of this split. A lot of it's not worked, and they've been a little bit inconsistent because of that, but it's really just, I don't want to take the Esports World Cup tournament all that seriously. I don't think it's a good indicator of what teams are good. I think the only series that I can pull out of that tournament that makes me feel confident in terms of like analysis is T1 versus Top Esports, an actual best of 5 where T1 was better. Okay, we saw that coming. Like, outside of that, best of threes, I just don't really have a lot to say about that. I still think that BLG is clearly the best team in the LPL, and I think they showed that off here, and especially because a couple of their players were getting back on track in this performance. Player of the series has to go to Knight. This guy has been a little bit invisible for the beginning part of this split. He's certainly been trying some stuff out in terms of his individual game plans. He's not really been winning all that much in the 1v1s. He's really just been weird. It's not been a very Knight-esque kind of performance from him in the regular season so far, but what I've been saying on the channel is just pump the brakes. Like, he's gonna be fine. When he shows up in the second group stage or when he shows up in playoffs, people are gonna be like, where was this Knight all year? And it's like, yeah, sometimes top players don't take every game as seriously. We've seen this in the past. Knight's gonna be fine, and Knight was fine. When he actually had to play a team that he cared about, he showed up. Like, it clearly is just one of those things where when you're playing against LGD and WE and, you know, teams like that every single week, you don't care as much. You're not putting in as much effort. When Knight has to play Top Esports, he is going to go out there and try, and he dominated. The Talia was brilliant in this series. The Tristana was great in game number 2, so I'm not worried about this team. You know, Shun was awesome this series. The Kindred dominated game number 3, was everywhere on the map. I do want to quickly address, we talked about Wei earlier on in the week from RNG. It is reported, and I believe it's confirmed at this point, that he has been loaned to Bilibili Gaming. I don't know what that is. Like, is that a coaching role? Is that a sub role? Like, if you're playing Wei over Shun, like, you're out of your mind. Like, to be entirely frank with you, if you are making the active decision as Bilibili, the team that, you know, just went to the finals of MSI, if you're making the active decision to bench Shun for Wei, like, you fire you on the spot. Like, fire the GM and the manager who makes that decision, the coach who makes that decision on the spot, because that is an indefensible decision. So we'll see. Shun played this series. I don't know if Wei is going to come in and play for this team. If he does, especially in big moments, that is a criminal decision, like truly a criminal decision, even if it works. Even if Wei comes in and is really good, Wei has been garbage for a year and a half, like truly bad regardless of the strength of the rest of his team for about a year and a half, and Shun has been, you know, to his own faults, one of the better junglers in the world, you know, top 3 to 5 jungler in the world. If you, for any reason, bench Shun for Wei, then that is indefensible. Like, as a in my opinion, it is completely indefensible. It hasn't happened yet, so I'm not going to try and yell at Bilibili if they brought him on as some sort of coach or sub, because there's nothing else for Wei to do, there's nothing else for him to play for in RNG, then that's great. But if he is playing games, especially regularly for this team, then they are stupid. Like, there is nothing else for me to say. That I will criticize them heavily for that if they make that decision. But, you know, Shun and Knight were really good in this series. That was all leading to. Elk has been my MVP frontrunner for a majority of this split so far. I think people are overlooking just how freaking good Elk has been. Bilibili has gone through their problems. Knight has not been perfect. Shun has not been perfect. Bin has not been perfect. Elk has been perfect. He has been carrying them in terms of their success rate, and that's huge, and hope people are starting to wake up to that. But everything was kind of working for Bilibili. They were the better team, especially down the back half of this series. But Top Esports, they can't feel too bad about this loss. Some weird drafts, like they were really stuck in their ways. Like the Senna Ornn, it was really something they wanted to play in this series. Don't love that. Jackie Love didn't, I mean, Jackie Love's great on Senna. Like, trust me, it's his best champion, I get it. But like he needed something a bit more proactive, especially in the back half of this series. And especially because the rest of these lanes were losing. Cream was losing lane to Knight, which is, expected, but not ideal. And 369 was getting bodied in the top lane. He's a clear choice for dead of the series. I don't know what happened to 369 this, series, and so far this split, honestly, but it's not been good. He was bad at MSI, was really kind of a letdown in terms of his performances there, and he's not come back and played all that well so far in summer either, even with the rest of this team doing well, and so we'll have to see. He was looking like the best top laner in the world in spring, and so, we'll have to see where this ends up going, but it's not ideal. Tion was playing Sejuani in a comp where every lane was losing, literally unplayable. Don't know what you want him to do in that circumstance, but Top Esports is fine. Like, they just went on to the finals of Esports World Cup, but don't overhype this team because they beat Gen G. Best of threes are best of threes. KT Rolster freaking beat Gen G in a best of three. Like, I'm not going to say KT Rolster can win Worlds. Top Esports is good. They are very good, but they're not perfect, and I think this was another kind of showcase of that. I honestly take this more into account than I do that Esports World Cup best of three. And then for Bilibili on the other side, again, don't count this team out because they lost to T1. Like, they're going to be just fine. This is still a team that's going to compete to win Worlds, and I think they absolutely have the talent to do so. And then moving on now to our penultimate day here on day number 6, and it's another group Nirvana game here as we had Rare Atom taking on Invictus Gaming, and predictably Rare Atom is actually going to pick up the win here. They avenge their loss earlier in the week that they probably shouldn't have had, and IG continues to really struggle when they don't just randomly play well. This is not a particularly good team. They have a lot of flaws. Their consistency is super low, and so them losing is certainly not a surprise, but Rare Atom definitely needed this. They needed to bounce back, and they needed to look a lot more consistent than whatever was happening earlier on in the week, and I think they did that here. The 2-0 was definitely in their favor. Maybe it wasn't as dominant as it seems on paper. Game 2 was definitely a lot closer than you would think. I think that there were some good moments. GLFS and Nenny both did some interesting things in that second game, but for the most part, Rare Atom was just better across the board in terms of their players, which I think is really what put them over the top. Player of the series is going to go to Jway. He got dud of the series earlier this week. Player of the series here. It's good to see that at the very least he can still have these good performances that for the most part he was having on Ultra Prime earlier on in the year. It wasn't super consistent. There would be some games that weren't great, but there were some games that were very good from him, and I think we were expecting that to continue. Coming over here to Rare Atom, it felt like they were retooling and trying to make a push for top 10. It hasn't exactly carried over in the way that maybe you would have wanted with Jway, but this was a good example of, like, what it could be if everything were to go right for him. That Bard game in game number 1 was the flashiest game of the series, by far, and I do want to continue to say the caveat, like, he's going into not only Invictus Gaming, who is very prone to big plays on the other side of the map, but he's going into Vampire, who's just not going to be able to keep up with him in terms of, like, support duties. Like, Vampire's just not that good. He's the worst player in the LPL at the current moment. So Jway's job was much easier in this series. That is definitely the case, but it's still worth noting when things do go right for a player, and things went right for him in this series. I think Vikla and Xiaohao definitely deserve a shout out as well. They were the other two players that I was really impressed by. The Lilia is just ridiculous from Xiaohao. He is in such good form right now. Who is shocked that Xiaohao is playing well in the summer split? It's kind of what this guy just does, and people forgot about that because every spring people are like, he was actually just mid after we hyped him up so much, and then in summer he breaks out again. It's been so regular for him over the past few years, so I'm not surprised to see him continue to play well. He is the best player on Rare Atom, and Vikla still is playing a lot better than people give him credit for. Nenny was generally fine, especially on the Corki in the back half of this series, but Vikla was definitely better. That Lucian game in Game 2 was spectacular. It truly was great. Him and Xiaohao seem to have very good chemistry in terms of how they want to play off of each other. They're not the perfect duo. Like, there are going to be some flaws, some problems, especially in the early game because of how aggressive Vikla in particular is in the 1v1, but you can get away with it because they are talented enough to win in the mid game, which I think is more important in the current meta, especially with a lot of these AP junglers. So I don't feel bad at all. Xiaoshu, Assume, they were generally fine here, but Jway was the standout, and I think jungle mid was also good for Rare Atom. And then for IG on the other side, they just lack talent. Like, that's really the problem. They were in a good position in this second game. They're just not good enough to close out games against teams that actually kind of know what they're doing or have the ability to win fights mechanically in the late game. They just don't really have the talent to be able to overcome that. They really rely a lot on their opponent just not playing well. And we saw that quite a bit in Group D when they were able to pick up wins against struggling teams. If the opponent is not struggling, if they're not throwing the game, I don't think Invictus is going to be all that lethal or all that difficult to beat. And you know, we kind of saw that here. Vampire's going to get done of the series. Once again, this guy's just not particularly good. I don't even think this is one of his worst series. I know I say that a lot when he gets done of the series, but it's just, you know, the games aren't flashily bad. Like, they're not standout in the nature that it's like, oh, this guy can't play at all. It's just the little things over and over again that end up costing his team. And everybody else at least has some flashes of being really good. Like, Nenny was miserable in game 1 on the Renekton mid, but was really good on the Corki in that second game and did a lot of good things for the team. I think you could say the same thing about GLFS, who basically was nothing in game 1 on the brand, but was significantly more impactful on the Vi, even if at times it was a negative kind of impact on the Vi in game number 2. Like, there are moments, there are flashes for everybody else on this team. There just aren't flashes for Vampire. He is just not a player that I'm really all that excited about right now, and he continues to really struggle at this level. On is definitely someone who is struggling more because of the lack of 2v2 pressure that is generated with that support position, and, you know, he's still a player I think could be good at this level, but it's not working out. You Should Know Me has been basically a non-factor for this team. I think he's been an upgrade over Zuyan, if only because Zuyan was so bad, but he's not exactly been a positive for them overall, and like I said, GLFS and Nenny were definitely kind of the I guess you could say positive factors in this series, especially in that second game on the Vi and on the Corki, but GLFS was just way too aggro, was constantly throwing good positions because he just wanted to keep taking fights over and over again, and while Nenny was doing a lot of damage at the end of the day, you know, the Corki problem still exists, and the fact that the damage numbers are really high, how much is he actually doing in a team fight to win the fight? Like, is he really going to be that primary carry when he's getting out-dueled by Lucian in some of these late-game 5v5s? That's really not an ideal situation to be in, so Invictus is generally whatever, right? Like, I don't think this is a good team at all, but they're going to luck into some wins if only because they're good at taking advantage of when other teams just completely shit the bed, and in Group Nirvana, that's going to happen every once in a while, but Rare Atom is better, and they proved that in this series. And then moving on to our second series here of day number 6, and another expected outcome in Group Nirvana. It's WE taking on RNG, and WE is going to pick up the 2-0 victory, as they should here. It's the best team in Group Nirvana taking on the worst team in Group Nirvana, at least at the current moment. WE slaughters them in both of these games. It never really felt all that competitive, and it probably shouldn't have felt all that competitive. WE is better by a lot. Honestly, they shouldn't be in Group Nirvana. They screwed up by losing to LGD, and LGD is going to feel very lucky about that. They're getting absolutely slammed up in Group Ascend right now, which is, I guess, what you can expect when you are LGD in the top group here, but WE should not have any trouble getting through this bottom group, and honestly, they really shouldn't have any trouble getting through the play-ins and actually making the playoffs itself, because they are a genuinely good team, and it feels like they have gotten better since their roster changes. Abel has definitely been an upgrade down in the bot lane. He is once again going to get player of the series here for WE. He is really starting to show why it was ridiculous that this team decided to go with LP at all at the beginning of this split, because Abel's not like a superstar AD carry. This guy is not going to come in and be like a consistent rock for your team. He's not going to come in and just fix all of your problems. He's super aggressive. You're going to have to worry a bit about the consistency on a game-to-game basis with him. That's always kind of been the problem, but mechanically speaking, he's very talented, and at the very least, he offers that. And so far, him being plugged in and him getting comfortable with the rest of the team, at least since the start of Group Nirvana, it's been so clear that this is such a gigantic upgrade that it makes you wonder why they even considered going with LP in the first place. Like, it makes that decision even more laughable. It already was laughable. We talked about that even before he played a single game for WE. You know, Stay was already in this system. You know, I think Prince is better than LP. It felt like a very crazy decision to make, but now especially that Abel is being essentially picked up as a free agent, comes in and immediately upgrades the team. It's just kind of a funny situation overall. So, you know, Abel playing well is great. An aggressive player that has actually kind of come in and calmed the team a bit, which is very funny. But Yang Xiang has actually been very interesting as well. Like, I think he just fits the meta way better. I see some, you know, reactionary takes where it's like, oh, if they had this player all along in the LDL, why was Hang playing in the first place? Hang is a better player. Like, all things considered, Hang is a better League of Legends player than Yang Xiang is, but Yang is better for this meta. He is a much better AP jungle player. Heng just can't really play that style. He's not a team fighter. He's not somebody that wants to move into the back half of the game. He wants to win early and fast. He is a Malrang, quote-unquote, type of jungler, very flashy, but in metas like this where games are going a bit longer, where it's a lot more advantageous for your jungle position to be a carry, that's not nearly as useful. And so, putting Yang Xiang here, even if he is, a little bit less mechanically talented on an individual basis, a little bit less capable of getting early leads on his own, it's probably better for the team as a whole, just purely because of the meta. Fofo is also still playing out of his mind. I want to continue to say that people are underestimating how good Fofo has been. He's going to be in the MVP conversation for me. I'm not going to say that he's going to win it, because this team's in Group Nirvana, and that would be a crazy thing for me to say, but he is, in my opinion, far and away the best player in Group Nirvana. It's not even remotely close. Like, he is the single best player in that section, and there's just no one that can even compete with him at the current moment in terms of the performances he's putting out. The Corki was amazing. I know Tong Yuan's not exactly the toughest of opponents on the other side, but it's worth noting. So for WE, the winning ways continue, and I would expect they will keep continuing. I think this team will maybe even go undefeated here in Group Nirvana. And then for RNG on the other side, this is the worst team in the LPL. We've already talked about it a bit. Their perception really doesn't change at all after this series. There's just a lot going wrong for them. Geju is once again going to get dud of the series. He just doesn't look good right now. The Zyra game in particular in Game 1 was miserable from him. The Wukong was slightly better in Game 2. He didn't make quite as many major errors. I actually think Quanfong probably played his worst game of the split on the Kai'Sa in Game number 2. But overall, Geju still continues to be the biggest issue for this team. He has no macro sense. That is really the read right now, is that this guy has absolutely no idea how to play professional jungle League of Legends. And I get it, he's like rank 1 solo queue, we talked about it earlier in the week, but you gotta learn how to transition that into professional, like organized playing. That just hasn't really happened for Geju yet. I think Juice also had a really horrible week. 2 games of Cassante here against Wayward, who is a good top laner, especially for this level, and Juice was not able to hold up. I think he's generally interesting as a top laner, but this was not a very good week for him in general. Like I said, Huanfeng and Awandi probably had their worst series to date. Tong Yuan is just absolutely nothing in the mid lane. He contributes nothing. This guy was involved in 4 kills across this entire series. I mean, it's just the most passive playstyle you've ever seen, especially for 2 games of Tristana, of all things. So not really a lot to write home for here from RNG. They're going to continue to be the worst team in the LPL unless things change, and WE will probably clear this group by a lot. We'll probably walk through this group. They're probably thinking of what they need to do to win their play-in series at this point, because honestly, it really does feel like Group Nirvana, at least at the current state, is just beneath them in terms of their skill level. And then moving on to our third and final series of day number 6 here, our penultimate day, as we've talked about. It's a fraud off, if you will, at least according to Reddit. It's Weibo Gaming versus Ninjas in Pyjamas, and Weibo Gaming is going to pick up the 2-0 series win. This is why you don't panic. This Weibo team is figuring things out right now. I know they just lost to LNG earlier in the week, but I think LNG is a good team at the moment, and Ninjas in Pyjamas, they are a team that's in real, disaster mode at the current moment. Things are just going wrong for them. They're one playstyle. They're very, I guess you could say one-dimensional view of the game is very much coming back to bite them at the current moment, because they're just not able to keep up with teams that are talented on the other side of the map. They're able to beat teams that Rookie can get ahead of, and when Rookie isn't winning, this team is just in disaster state. And unfortunately for NIP, Rookie's really not been all that good over the last 2 weeks. Like, I get that he's leading the player of the game standings, and if you look at metrics, he looks pretty good, but I honestly don't think he's been all that good over the course of this split. He's certainly not been nearly as good as he was in the spring split, in my opinion, and the rest of the team has struggled a lot because of it. It really showed just how important Rookie was to generating the success of everyone else, to Photic and Zhuo in particular, but Shanji and Aki are also really struggling right now. Nip just has a ton of problems, but for Weibo, on the other side, this team continues to be way better than people are giving them credit for, as I've stated on this channel over the course of this split. First of all, Tarzan is so good. I don't understand the Tarzan hate right now. I really just can't comprehend it in my brain. It is so difficult for me to wrap my head around why people are so low on Tarzan. Is it because people wanted to be low on Tarzan? Because people wanted to be right about him leaving LNG being a good thing for LNG overall, when that's clearly proven not to be the case? Is it because, people want to be proven correct on their scapegoating of him over the last couple of years, regardless of the kind of team he's been on? Like, I don't really understand understand why people are so low on him, but he has been by far the best player on Weibo, and quite frankly, he's been one of the best junglers in the LPL, at least over the past month or so. He's really figured things out, and things have been really strong for him. This AP jungle meta, surprisingly, is actually working for him. This is not a meta I would have expected him to do well in, because when you think of Tarzan, you think of tanks, you think of, facilitative engagers, things like Sejuani and Zac and Maokai. Like, that's Tarzan in my brain. That's what he's always been. He's been a really good tank jungle player, engage tank jungle player, and, for him to be able to play Brand and really dominate on it, for him to pull out Nidalee in game number 1 and look as good as he did, it's just really impressive. I get that Ninjas in Pyjamas is not doing super well at the moment, but at some point we have to put some respect on Tarzan's name, and just all these people that wrote him off and talked about how he's going to be such a detriment to whatever team he's on, eventually they have to figure out that that is not the case, that has not been reality. And honestly, at no point in his career has it been reality. He's made every single team he's played for better, and so I don't really know. I'm a huge fan of Tarzan. I've talked about it before, but I think generally, especially LPL fans, but League of Legends fans just underrate, facilitative junglers, non-flashy junglers. Canyon and Kanavi, they're great, and they're the best junglers in the world, but Peanut and Tarzan and players who play these Sejuanis and these Maokais and do really well in those roles, they don't get nearly as much love, and in fact, they're considered overrated because they're not nearly as flashy. And I hope that my channel at least somewhat is there to help dispel that notion, because they are incredibly good players. Maybe they're not Kanavi or Canyon, I'm not trying to say that, but they're certainly more valuable than they get credit for, and Tarzan continues to prove that game after game after game. And Xiaohu, what happened in this series? Rookie got destroyed by Xiaohu in a 1v1 lane, not only in game 2, where obviously it was a lot more noticeable, the Yone was dominant in that second game, but game number 1 as well was still really good from Xiaohu. He was just awesome in this series. This is the best he's played this year by a large margin. He has been the albatross for Weibo Gaming. It's really hard to win when the middle of your map is just such a detriment game after game after game, but he was really good into a player that he had to be good into, so credit to Xiaohu. He's actually going to get player of the series here. Definitely his first of the year, but hopefully this means the form is getting better, because it just needs to be okay. The rest of this team is actually doing all right. Like, I've been low on Light and Crisp. Again, I said earlier this week, I don't think they've been playing well. Crisp in particular is really disappointed for me, but the Senna Ornn actually kind of works for them in terms of what they want to do. I think Breathe is starting to lock in a bit more at the very least. They just need to get a little bit better around Tarzan, who has been their carry for a majority of this year. If they can do that, they're going to be fine. They're going to be around top 5 or top 6. I don't think this is a Worlds team, and I don't really think people have to worry about this being a Worlds team. Perhaps if they figure everything out or go on a run in the playoffs, it could be possible, but I just don't see that happening. And then for Nip, very quickly, Rookie was bad in this series. He's going to get done of the series. He got completely outplayed by Xiaohu, and if that's the case, they can't win. Like, if Xiaohu, who has really been struggling, is going to outplay Rookie, there's just no shot. Like, they have no other win condition. I can't make that clear enough. If Rookie wins, this team is always going to be in a series because he's one of the more dangerous carries in the entire world. When Rookie loses, they just don't have a shot. There is nothing they can play for. Shanji, Aki, Photic, Zhuo, none of them have shown that they can step up and be a primary carry for this team in any circumstance, and if that's going to be the case, then this team's never going to go far. In fact, I'm really out on Ninjas in Pyjamas right now, not only because they're 0-3, 0-6, but because of the way that they got to 0-3 and 0-6. They are so one-dimensional that I really don't see teams not being able to just completely take away their game plan. If you send 3 people mid every game, nobody else in this team is going to beat you. That is what they have proven, and so I'm not afraid of Ninjas in Pyjamas, and at this point, I think that top 4 finish in spring was a bit more fraudulent than we can definitely expect. So I don't think they're going to be in competition for a world spot. Weibo Gaming is clearly the more interesting of these two teams, and I would expect that to continue over the course of the rest of Group Ascend. And then moving on now to our 7th and final day of LPL action here in week number 2, and we kicked off day number 7 with a matchup between Ultra Prime and ThunderTalk Gaming, and ThunderTalk is going to pick up another 2-0 win. This is the expected turn of events, at least at the beginning of the week, but Ultra Prime continues to just not find any form of consistent form over the course of this split. One game and one series, they're 2-0ing Rare Atom, who is way better than ThunderTalk, and another, they're losing 2-0 to ThunderTalk, and it's close, but it's not, like, ridiculously close. Like, ThunderTalk was definitely better, even if Ultra Prime were in good positions in this series. They had good spots, they just couldn't close out games, and it's got to be frustrating for Ultra Prime fans who are looking at this and saying, like, well, what are we missing? Like, what exactly isn't clicking in a series like this that is clicking against a team like Rare Atom that is better than ThunderTalk? It's very strange. It's a very strange turn of events, but We'll talk about Ultra Prime in a minute. Let's talk about Thunder Talk. Player of the series is going to go to 1xN down in the AD carry role. I've been really low on 1xN, and I've pushed back super heavily on this. Oh, he's a next future LPL star, whatever narrative that is around him. I just don't see it. I don't think he has the mechanical upside to do so. Not only that, but he's really not aggressive enough in order to become a star at this level. When you think about the top 5 AD carries in the LPL, when you think about the players who are at least in contention for that, at any point who have ever been in contention for that, all of them have been willing to go out there and try to win the game on their own. 1xN's just not that kind of player. He's a lot more like, I want to play in structure. I don't really want to lose the game, rather than I'm out here trying to dominate games and win it. You know, maybe if he has that mentality change, I think he could become, you know, like an Abel caliber player, which I think is like borderline top 5, top 6, like somewhere in that zone. I think it's possible for him to grow into that. I don't think that's going to happen. Right now, he's somewhere around like number 10 or number 11 in terms of the AD carries in the LPL. There are just a lot of good ADCs, and I will continue to push back on the I think he's a superstar kind of hype, because I don't think he's a superstar. I think he's better than maybe I've been giving him credit for, though. He is an average AD carry in the LPL, and that alone is a valuable thing to have for a team in Group Nirvana. Like, there are a lot of teams in Group Nirvana that don't have that, and so to have an AD carry that you can at least rely on to be what he's supposed to be, to go out there and win games in the back half on Kai'Sa, on Zeri, I mean, that's better than Doggo on the other side of this matchup, and so, you know, I think they're going to be happy to have that. I just don't think he's the star that everyone's making him out to be. I certainly don't think Feather has been helping him. You know, there were some good engages this series, but I'm still very unimpressed by Feather, who I think is one of the weaker supports in the LPL, and I just really have not liked what I've seen. Yukal continues to look awesome. Yukai was actually pretty good on the other side of this matchup. Ultra Prime did a good job of winning early. I think that's where Yukai really excels as a mid laner, but Yukal is way more, you know, consistent and just a way more clinical in the back half of these games, and that became very clear, especially in game 2 on the Corki. But he played Zeri mid in game number 1. Like, what did you expect? Of course he was going to be losing lane throughout a majority of this series. I think Hoya was actually pretty good in this series, which is very concerning. It just goes to show that Xingtian, you know, kind of came back down to earth in this one after having a really good series against Rare Adam. If Hoya is beating you in the top lane, that is not a good performance. Same thing for, like, 1xN. Like, if you're getting styled on by 1xN, if a player who has really not done all that much over the course of the beginning part of his career is coming out and just kind of styling on you, that's really not a great look, in my opinion, for Ultra Prime, but we'll get into them in a second. I think for just a general consensus, Thunder Talk is an okay team. I don't know if they're going to be top 3 or so in this group. I think it's possible for them. They're going to have to compete with other teams around there like Rare Adam, and, you know, we'll see if that ends up, you know, working out for them, but they have enough talent to at least be in the vicinity of that kind of conversation, and for Ultra Prime, they probably should be in that conversation, but the consistency is just not there. Again, losing a series like this, especially throwing leads that you were able to generate early on and not really being able to carry that over, it's not really ideal. Nicket's going to get another dud of the series here. This guy just continues to be super inconsistent. Honestly, it feels like he's been figured out a bit in terms of his roam timers, because teams are playing a lot safer against this team in the mid game, and Ultra Prime doesn't really have any answers. They don't really have anybody else on this team that's willing to go out and make plays. I really like Hacker, but on Lilia, he's not going to be able to do that on his own. You're relying on Nicket, you're relying on Yukai in particular to really be dominating, and Yukai did a good job winning lane, but what is this team's late game plan? Like, really, what were they supposed to do in the late game to close this out? Because I don't think they knew. I know what you're supposed to do here, and I'm sure you guys at home know what we're supposed to do here with Lilia, Lucian, Ezreal. It becomes very clear that, okay, well, we can just take every tower in the game, right? Like, this becomes a lot easier of a solution. You have a Gnar on the top side. This game 2 should be really, really simple in terms of the back half, but it didn't feel like they had a very good grasp of what they were supposed to be doing, and they end up falling because of that. You know, Doggo was generally fine. I honestly don't think the individual plays on Ultra Prime were all that bad, other than maybe Nicket and Xingtian, who continue to look overmatched as long as they go into anybody that's even remotely playable, which is never really ideal, but I don't think this is a horrible individual performance from Ultra Prime. It's more concerning just because this team continues to show a lack of ability to close games out and to be consistent and to know what to do in the back half of games, and that's going to be a bigger problem. So I don't know where Ultra Prime stands. They're an interesting team that cannot consistently find any wins. And then for Thunder Talk, again, like I said, good team that might be able to compete for a play-in spot. I don't think they're going to get much further than that. I don't think they're talented enough to get much further than that, as much as I love Yukal and as good as I think he is. I just don't think they have that kind of upside, but this is another nice win, and they continue to show that they are a team you have to take seriously here in the bottom group. Then moving on to the second series of day number 7, and this is the one I was really waiting for, a top-of-the-table clash between Anyone's Legend and JD Gaming, and JDG is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. We needed to see this out of JDG. AL had been looking white hot coming into a series like this, and honestly, they're for real. Like, this is a genuinely good team, and we saw that even more in this series. Shanks in particular was unfreaking believable for AL. On the other side of this matchup, we will talk about that more as we go along, but JDG had just enough firepower to get over the top. Game 3 was really all them, even if the first 2 games were very AL favored, quite frankly. Game 1, JDG did a good job of closing it out, and I'm certainly not going to criticize, Ruler. Oh, he was the only one playing well in the Ezreal. Yeah, I think you can live with that. I think that's probably something you can be okay with if you're JD Gaming, but Game 2, AL looked really legit, and Shanks was gapping Yagao for the entirety of the series, really, so they needed that game number 3, and they needed Sheer. They needed their rookie star top laner to step up and be that guy, and he was. He's going to get player of the series here. And honestly, I'm willing to say this is something that is really unquantifiable, and it goes against the way that I do analysis on this channel, but we're about an hour and a half into the video, and so, at this point, I would think that the hardcore fans would understand what I'm trying to say. Sheer has the clutch factor. Like, there is nothing else to say. The big games, the big moments, Sheer is ready for that, and that's what really excites me about him as a young top laner. I think that in a league where top lane is really bad right now, at least at the middle level where there really aren't a lot of proven great top laners in the LPL, having someone like Sheer, who I think is someone you can rely on to beat really good top laners if he's given resources, is a scary thing to have, and I think he's going to get better. Remember, this is not the first time that he's gone into a really good team and done very well. In fact, it's been very regular for him. He did it last split against Top Esports. He destroyed 369 in the 1v1 when they played last split. That was something that was really fun to watch. He's doing it again with All A here. It didn't really get a chance in the playoff run because they put Flandre back in, but I think Sheer is going to be a menace in this league for quite a long time. That Twisted Fate game in game number 3 was truly exceptional, and it's a really good sign to see that they can go up against a good team, and Kanavi can still be good, but he doesn't have to be the #1 guy for this team, really, in any of their games. He was very consistent, and the Zyra, the brand, it was good stuff. Like, his tempo was very solid. It's Kanavi. Like, you're only going to get such a bad performance, but he didn't have to carry these games. Ruler and Missing were great, especially in game number 1 on the Ezreal and the Rel. That really feels like something they're going to lock in and be a little bit more consistent on. I think the Ezreal in particular plays to this JDG style really well, and I would expect that to be something this team continues to go to, but there is a negative, and that is Yagao in the mid lane, who was pretty horrible in this series, got completely outclassed by Shanks. On the other side of this matchup, Shanks has been pretty all-world over the course of this split so far, and so I don't think it's the worst loss in the universe, but Yagao simply has to be better in these big moments. He's honestly been pretty good over the course of summer. This was a bit of an out-of-character performance, at least from what he has shown this split so far, so I would expect things to get better, but he was not good. Honestly, he was saved by the fact that Ale got gapped by Sheer in the top lane from getting dud of the series. Like, Yagao was a very real candidate for that over the course of these 3 games. So JDG was solid enough. You can definitely live with the fact that Yagao didn't play well because Ruler and Sheer in particular looked very good, and those are the 2 players that you really need to look really good for this team. And then Braille on the other side, it's so sad. Like, they were so close to winning this, and I think they had an opportunity, but they just weren't able to get it done. Shanks is a monster. Like, there's just nothing else I can say. The hype about him is very much real. He is a top, 5-ish mid laner in the world right now, at least in terms of current performance. He really is putting on that kind of a show. He doesn't need to be the main carry every single series. We saw that with Krako and with Ale and Hope and Kale at multiple points throughout this split, but if he needs to be the guy, he can be the guy. He is really versatile. Honestly, it reminds me a lot of how Rookie was playing last split for Ninjas in Pyjamas, where he's just kind of doing a bit of everything for this team, but I think he's got a much better team around him, and that's really fun to say. Unfortunately, it just didn't come to fruition in this one. Ale is a very easy choice for dead of the series, got completely destroyed in game 3 on the Kennen, like, single-handedly lost that game 3, and it's very frustrating. Like, Ale is a good player, but he can be a bit inconsistent, and again, Sheer is known to step up against these really good top laners. Ale is still one of the best top laners in the LPL, don't get it twisted, but this was not the performance you wanted to see out of him. Krako's scoreline generally looks a bit worse than maybe he was, but I think he also could have been a bit better. Kanavi was definitely the better jungler, although not all that shocking, and Hope and Kale were not as good as Ruler and Missing on the other side, especially when they were on more passive lanes like the Ashe and the Braum, but AL has win conditions, like Shanks can win games, and Krako I don't think was all that bad. You know, Hope and Kale aren't a win condition typically for this team, but if Ale can just step up and be, like, fine against Sheer, I actually think AL has a chance to beat a team like JDG. This is honestly kind of encouraging. Maybe they're not a top 3 team right now, but they theoretically could be even with this loss, and for JDG, it's just nice to see them stay on track to actually beat a good team. They've not really been tested over the course of this split, at least at a major level up until this point. This was their first big test of the summer split, and they passed it. They actually looked really good, and Sheer and Ruler in particular kind of being the ones to push them forward is really encouraging as well, so hopefully that's something that can continue for them. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here. I appreciate you guys sticking around. I know this video is kind of long. I tried to trim it down as much as possible, keep these segments to, 4-ish minutes each, and I appreciate you guys sticking through it, but we got a real banger for the final series of the week. It's LNG Esports taking on Top Esports, and LNG pulls up the 2-0 win. That's pretty crazy. I know Top Esports coming off of the Esports World Cup, probably a bit fatigued. I'm not going to try to overthink this loss. They played pretty poor here, and I think there are some real concerns about whether or not they are getting exposed a bit in terms of their playstyle, which I think was a concern at the beginning of the year, but, I am going to give them some time to try to readjust, but this is a big win for LNG. This is something that really does prove, okay, yeah, all of those people that were just writing off LNG, once again, the quote-unquote fraud debate proves to be a fruitless one, as it always is. Every single year we go through the same thing. It's funny, I don't really know how many LPL fans are like long-term LPL fans. I don't know how many people who are like commenting on Reddit or commenting on Twitter watch a lot of the LPL or have watched it a lot over the past couple of years, but this fraud debate, this fraud conversation, it happens every year. Every year we have this team that is really underperforming for a bit, that is inconsistent, where you have star players that just don't really seem to be clicking, but it's in low pressure situations. Things really aren't looking all that bad. They're about 500, but they were just expected to be better kind of thing. And every year people are like, well, they're frauds. They're never going to get it together. And at some point it's like, you gotta learn from history. You gotta learn that these teams almost always get it together. And this was Weibo last year. Like, this was Weibo Gaming who went to World Finals last year in terms of how they ended up performing. It's funny because Weiwei is on this team, and I think they do play kind of similarly, but they just needed to figure out a play style that worked for them. They just needed to kind of get together and figure out what they wanted to do, and I think they've started to figure out something that works a bit better than the style they were going for. What they were doing at the beginning of the year was trying to play the 2023 LNG style, just with Weiwei instead of Tarzan, and honestly, that's never going to work. Tarzan is a significantly better team fighter than Weiwei is, and so when you play this like late game, mid-game style comp for LNG, you rely on getting Scout into good positions in the mid-game and trying to give him as much gold as possible to get numbers advantages. All of a sudden that doesn't work because Weiwei's not playing that style nearly as efficiently as Tarzan was going to play it. So what do? Just transition into being more aggressive around the map. Allow players like Gala to win lane more consistently. Let Weiwei be a little bit more of an aggressive player. Let Zika play Rise or whatever on the top side and split push the entire series. Start to play something that pulls apart enemy teams, and all of a sudden now things are working a bit better. Scout is going to get player of the series. He's the one player I didn't mention. He was awesome in these two games. Cream was not nearly as good on the other side of this matchup. His champion pool is starting to get exposed. A lot of people were concerned about this at the beginning of the year. I wasn't nearly as concerned. I always think Cream's champion pool problems have been overstated, and I still think they are overstated. He's been really good on a variety of champions over the course of this year, but you are going to run into some issues every once in a while, and Scout is the kind of player that can take advantage of that. He's not the most dominant laner in the entire universe. His 1v1s have never really been all that unbelievable. It's never really been his style as a player. He's loved jungle attention over the years, especially when he was on EDG, and last year as well, he loved playing with Tarzan, and that's something that really works for him. But in side lanes, he can be really effective as well. Just get him out and moving on the map in the mid to late game. That's really where you want Scout to be. You want him to try to be proactive in the mid to late game. You want him to be kind of a focal point for your game plan, and I think he was in this series. And again, I think they're just finding a style that ends up fitting their players better, and that's really kind of the big positive. Gala and Hong continue to look excellent as a duo. That's never been in question, even at this team's worst. Like, Gala and Hong have been amazing over the course of this split. Zika actually has looked really good so far in the main stage here, like the group ascend. He was player of the week in week number 1. He just gapped 369 super hard in the series on Rise and Camille, and so Zika's really re-emerging, and this is a really good look, and Weiwei, I think, is settled into his role. He doesn't have to be the carry on this team, and he has really kind of found a nice middle ground, I think, between what he was asked to do at the beginning of the year, which was way out of his comfort zone, and what he would want to do in a general scenario, what he's done for most of his career, which doesn't really fit the rest of this team. I think he's found a nice middle ground where he can still be aggressive in the early game, but he doesn't need to do it by getting all of the resources himself. So Generally, I think LNG's in a really nice spot right now, and this is why I feel very vindicated for not having given up on them in my power rankings. They've been top 5 or top 6 all year. I've never moved them out of top 5 or top 6. I was never worried about them because even at their worst, I thought they would be a team that contends for Worlds, and I think they still can contend for a World spot. And for top esports, you know, there are some concerns here. The solo lanes were completely gapped. Like 369 and Cream were just not good enough in this series, and that is definitely a concern. 369 in particular has looked really bad in summer, especially in comparison to his career norms. He's going to get dud of the series once again here, getting gapped by Rise and Camille for Zika. Like, it's not a good look. It's really not something that you want to see out of him, and he is the one player I'm most concerned about. If he doesn't figure things out, it's going to be a bit of a problem for this team, but it's 369. This is a player that should be able to figure things out and at least try to stabilize on the top side of the map. It's just not been very good for him in summer. He's genuinely not been a good top laner, and, you know, Cream's champion pool problems are still going to get overstated. I understand that they are a little bit more limited, but, he got pushed onto Azir and Corki and just didn't get the support he needed in this matchup. I can live with that, right? Cream got gapped, but Scout's a good player and he knew how to play the matchup a little bit better than Cream did. Scout should be better than Cream as a mid laner. It's just not really played out like that over the course of this year. Jackie Love and Mako also need to be a little bit more careful when the rest of their team is losing. They really have not had to deal with that over the course of this year, but Gala and Hong you have to take seriously, and the rest of this LNG team you have to take seriously. I don't think they played up to that standard. I think they were a little bit too laissez-faire, if you will, in this series, but Tion continues to impress me, at least in terms of his ability to get resources, even if his macro wasn't perfect in this series, and I get that there were a lot of worries about his ability to play from behind, and the fact that he does take advantage of mistakes more than he does, actively generate his own resources, but at the very least, he's able to get gold for himself and for his team, which I think is more than other teams, and so I'm worried about top in, a small way. I'm not going to freak out about this team. I still think they're going to be top 3, but there are real concerns, and this is a real loss. I'm not going to try to overlook it, but for LNG, this is just kind of as expected for me. It's funny because I think a lot of people are going to change their opinions on LNG after this week. They're probably going to stay at number 5 in my power rankings. They probably won't move. This is exactly what I anticipated from them. Maybe not beating top esports, but I certainly didn't think it was out of the realm of possibility. This was always on the table for me, and I'm glad to see that my patience with them and the fact that I haven't overreacted and just dropped them after a couple of bad series here and there has actually paid off here. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LPL week number 2 overview and analysis video in the official summer split here now. Up on the screen, you can see the updated standings after 2 weeks of action. Group Ascend, Group Nirvana, both separated. Of course, nobody's locked in for anything other than play-ins just yet. We've still got a lot of this season left to play before we know exactly where everyone's going to land, but we do have a clearer idea. Of course, any ties will just be broken alphabetically, not trying to show any favoritism here, but on the right of every single team, you can see the power ranking column. That's where I personally power rank these teams from number 1 to number 17, and change is how they have changed from last week to this week, so we can go over risers and fallers now. Risers are definitely interesting. 2 and 3 are going to swap spaces. JDG is going to jump up to 2. Top Esports going to fall down to number 3. I'm not willing to move Top Esports out of the top 3. I mean, I feel like that would be pretty ridiculous after one bad week, especially coming off of a pretty major tournament where you went deeper than anybody else in the region did, and so I'm going to give them some time to figure things out. I think they will be fine in the long run, but I do want to reward LGD Gaming, who was awesome this week. 3-0 week for them, and they definitely deserve to move up, and at least for now, they are the number 2 team in the LPL. I think it's very close. Top 3 are all very close, but not really a lot of other changes. You're going to see people be, moving around some of these teams. LNG is going to shoot up everybody's power rankings this week, but I already had them at number 5. I already felt like this was going to be a team that proved themselves over the course of this group ascend, and all I've done is been rewarded for that, and so really happy about that. I am going to switch 6 and 7 as well. Weibo Gaming going to leapfrog Ninjas and Pyjamas. NIP might fall even further if they continue to play the way that they are over the coming weeks, right? FPX, WE even, these teams feel like they're kind of better than Ninjas and Pyjamas right now, so we're going to have to see something different, but I think this team is going to continue to struggle, and Weibo Gaming looking a lot more consistent. They're going to jump into the top 6, but rest of the top 10 is actually going to stay the same. You can see WE down in Group Nirvana, rounding out that top 10, if you will. LGD hanging on by a thread to that top 10 spot. We'll see how that continues to age. They might even fall further if they continue to just look horrible in Group Ascend, but In Group Nirvana, as you can see, quite a few changes, a lot more than you're getting in Group Ascend. I think there were quite a few more interesting results, and so Rare Atom may be controversially going to stay at 11. I think that is something that we're going to have to wait and see on, but I still think they're probably the second best team in Group Nirvana, at least for now. I need to see them consistently lose before I really take them out of that, although I wish they would have won both of their series this week. And then you got some changes. Thunder Talk going to move up to 12. This team is fine. I don't think they're exceptional, but I think that they are a team that can compete for like a top 3-ish spot in this group, so they're going to be there. And OMG jumping up 4 spots to number 13. They were at number 17 in my power rankings going into the week. They had finally picked up some wins, and they looked pretty good here. They definitely looked a lot more consistent. Hopefully the roster changes are for real, and they're not just one-week wonders, which we've kind of seen in the past from some roster changes. Hopefully they can keep up this kind of momentum, but they're going to move to 13 for now, and Ultra Prime is going to move up to number 14. Very inconsistent week for a very inconsistent team. I just trust them a tad bit more. I think their upside is a bit more than the teams that I have below them, and that includes a team that's moving down 3 spots, LGD Gaming, moving to number 15. I don't trust this team at all. Actually, I really don't. I think this is one of the worst teams in the LPL right now, and with that roster, that's pretty unacceptable. This coaching staff is not doing a very good job this year getting the best out of their players, or these players are underperforming. It is what it is, right? Like, this org is continuing to underperform, and honestly, I do not think that they are going to make a play-in spot, even though they probably should. And then bottom 2, Invictus Gaming going to drop down to 16. This team is just not very talented. I get that they're going to pull off some upsets here or there because they're just kind of weird like that, but this team shouldn't be winning games, and that was proven again over the course of this week. And then, as I've said multiple times in this video, RNG clearly the worst team in the LPL right now. They're going to fall to number 17. So let me know what you agree with or disagree with down in the comment section below. Did I overreact with any of these changes? Did I underreact with not moving a team up or down? Would love to know your thoughts and opinions on everything in these power rankings down in the comment section below. But it's time to move into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 2. And player of the week was a very easy choice. This one's going to go to Kanavi, the jungler for JD Gaming. You know, a lot of people are talking about him as an MVP favorite. I'm kind of in that camp after this week. He really was that good. It's going to be a very interesting race. We'll see how teams like BLG end up finishing out because Elk is right there with him for me, but Kanavi was unbelievable in week number 2, and I think so long as he's able to keep winning like he is right now, it's going to be a pretty easy conversation. Again, I am, kind of considering him the best jungler in the world. I think his team is not very good, and I think he does more for his team than any jungle in the world does. Canyon might be better in terms of individual performances, but it's hard to really tell because the team circumstances are so different. Kanavi is so integral and essential to what JDG does, and, Canyon's part of a puzzle in Genji, so it's definitely a bit of a different conversation, but Kanavi at least deserves to be in the conversation. And then for the honorable mention this week, Kroko, the jungler for AL, was really good. Maybe outside of that that JDG series, I should say. I still think he was fine. Wasn't the biggest problem. Kanavi was definitely better, but those first 2 series, Kroko was genuinely unbelievable. He, at the very least, deserves an honorable mention for that. And then Abel, the AD carry for WE. WE is running through Group Nirvana right now, as they probably should, and Abel has really settled in to the primary carry role for them. I think that this is the perfect situation for him and the perfect situation for WE. It kind of moves everybody down one peg on the ladder. Fofo can become your secondary carry, Wayward can become your third carry, and all of a sudden things become a little bit easier for you to play through because you can put resources into the bot lane, which is not something you've been able to do over the course of this split up until this point. So I think Abel coming on to WE and playing as well as he has really helped this team out a lot, and he's going to get an honorable mention for player of the week because of it, but Kanavi will be getting the award. And then dud of the week for me is pretty easily going to go to Geju. There were other options this week, quite a few other options this week, but I thought Geju was the worst player in the LPL, and I think RNG continues to look like the worst team in the LPL. People are talking about Wei being sold off being like the final nail in the coffin. This team had already dug its grave long before Wei was gone. I don't think Wei leaving is like some backbreaker, but Geju was clearly not a great replacement for this team. I think that he is clearly going to struggle a bit at the start. His pro readiness is clearly not there. The mechanical skill is obviously something that is real with him. The upside is clearly real with him because of his solo queue rank, but at least from what we've seen so far from him on RNG, he is not ready to play at the top level in the LPL for a team and an org that is expecting to be anything other than last place. So he's going to get dud of the week here as a pretty easy choice, and Kanavi will be getting player of the week. But that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, let me know down in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LPL on this channel. We post about all 4 of the major regions. That's the LCS, LEC, LCK, and the LPL every single week on this channel. So hit subscribe and hit that bell if you are interested. Of course, we also post about the NACL. That's Tier 2 over in North America. So if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, hit the subscribe button and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, With all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. Hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.